To quote a protagonist from another beloved retrofuturistic sci-fi franchise, space is the final frontier, and I think America would agree with this sentiment in the Fallout universe. As we explore the waste, we uncover many space-based projects and ambitions that pre-war America had planned that were cut short by the Great War, with quite a few being overtly eye-opening and revealing. But first, before we get too far into this, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below if you enjoyed this video. All of your support goes a long way in helping get more of my content out into the world for more people to enjoy. To start our story off today, we must dive into a bit of history to properly understand the context in which American space endeavors stood by the late 21st century. The United States Space Administration was the in-universe version of NASA, whose origins came during the mid to late 1950s, presumably 1958, the year when NASA was established and was in charge of the federal space program. This was primarily to develop and refine nuclear weapon delivery vehicles like ICBMs, with a secondary goal of civilian space exploration. The early success being Captain Bell's flight into space in 1961 that tragically ended in his death upon re-entry. This was quickly followed by the first manned moon mission, when Captain Richard Wade, Mark Garris, and Michael Hagen landed on the moon on July 16, 1969 aboard the Virgo 2 lunar lander Valiant 11, and then the Virgo 3 lander Valiant 12 followed on November 14th of the same year, which left behind a specially constructed flight that resisted solar bleaching. The moon program will continue on with an unknown number of missions, with the last known civilian one was in 2052 when the Zeus 12 mission would retrieve the Valiant 12 flag. This was only doable thanks to the powerful Delta 9 rocket, which the USSA had begun work on in 2020 but would complete to 2054 despite being the vehicle used in the last manned moon mission in 2052. This was probably a mistype by a Bethesda writer, and the Delta 9 was actually completed in 2045 with the project lasting 25 years. The flag was put on display within the Museum of Technology in Washington, D.C., after which the Delta 9 would be retired by the USSA and repurposed into nuclear delivery vehicle by the Air Force by gutting the crew compartment and electronics to make room for a massive nuclear warhead. At an indeterminate time, probably in the 2040 or 50s, the United States and another unknown space-capable nation would fight over the Sea of Tranquility on the moon for an as-of-yet undetermined reason. I like to imagine it was with the Soviets, a la For All Mankind, and would be a prelude into America's future spacefaring ambitions that encouraged heavy investment into the militarization of space, which we will touch on in a bit. In 2070, the Deep Sleep project would begin, with the crew of the Valiant 1 space station being unwitting test subjects. This was a project to test the effect of suspended animation in space and create a neural link between the station's AI Athena and the subjects for observational purposes. They used Formula K so Athena could monitor the subjects and compile data on them remotely. Commander Sophia Daguerre, Dr. Carl Bernard, Dr. Nowak, and Dr. Lee would go into hibernation for a planned period of 5 years, which would then be extended to 10 by mission control. However, they would all be stranded in space when the Great War kicked off 7 years after they entered hibernation, after which, due to neglect, the station's orbit would begin to decay and Valiant 1 would crash into West Virginia. Sophia would be the only survivor of this Voltec-like experiment. In 2075, the USSA would announce the Mars Shot project, which, as the name suggests, had the stated goal of bringing astronauts to Mars. Many American corporations were contracted to assist in the Mars Shot project, with Arcjet Systems being one of the main beneficiaries, making the risky gamble and starting work on the XMB booster engines early pay off spectacularly, as it allowed them to promise the engines a year early before the expected delivery date, despite the draft stealing a few of their employees. The other contracts that they landed was the Deep Range Transmitter, which is designed for interplanetary communication, but sadly the Mars Shot project was delayed in 2077. Officially, this was because of the Sino-American War heating up again as the Chinese was entirely pushed out of Alaska, and America was fully on the offensive in eastern China as we drove up the Yangtze River and across the Gobi Desert. But the actual reasoning for Mars Shot's delay and ultimate cancellation may be much darker. The Enclave's original goal was to escape Earth aboard spaceships and settle on a new planet in the event of nuclear war. This was presumably Mars, and the Mars Shot project was supposed to begin construction on the facility on the Red Planet, with the eventual goal being a subterranean habitat very similar to a vault, the social conditions of which is what Project Safe House was designed to simulate to give the Enclaves insight on how well this might work. But the project was abandoned as either the Enclave realized this wasn't feasible, or they were simply running out of time and had to shift their priorities elsewhere. However, vast amounts of resources were dumped into construction and putting the many automated weapon platforms America had into orbit. Kovac-Muldoon, Bradley-Hercules, and the Highwater Trousers are the known US military stations in orbit, while Poseidon Energy had two experimental Archimedes satellites. All were activated in the final years of the pre-war era and capable of launching orbital bombardments in one form or another. Kovac-Muldoon had conventional munitions, while Bradley and Highwater were armed with tactical nuclear weapons, and the two Archimedes satellites were laser-based. Kovac-Muldoon was the first of these weapon systems, and it was locked over West Virginia in geosynchronous orbit to be the permanent eyes in the sky for the enclave in the congressional bunker. Modus was directly connected to the station. He used it to keep tabs on the world above the bunker for intelligence gathering purposes, and to support enclave operations with supply drops and missile strikes. Kovac-Muldoon was classified to the public and stayed hidden from prying eyes thanks to the use of state-of-the-art anti-detection systems on board that masked the station's presence from the Chinese. But this came at a heavy price, as the cloaking systems drew much more power than expected, severely limited the station's lifespan. This was noticed by the development team and helped them avoid making the same mistakes when constructing the Bradley-Hercules and Highwater Trouser stations. These twin orbital weapon platforms were locked in geosynchronous orbit over the Washington, D.C. area at the time of the Great War, and retained their position the entire time thanks to their much simpler design that gave them much longer lifespan. Both stations were autonomous just like their older brother, but had much larger teeth to bite with, as they are armed with 8 salvos of 9 tactical nuclear missiles for a total of 72 nuclear weapons each, making these platforms a much deadlier threat on the battlefield, with the ability to obliterate entire concentrations of Chinese soldiers or targets in a single atomic blow, which was acceptable military strategy at this point in history, as I explained in this previous video. The platform was probably designed to be parked over a theater of war like Alaska or China in geosynchronous orbit to provide a constant stream of intelligence with their vast array of optical sensors and tactical support on a moment's notice when a strike was considered crucial enough to justify the massive munitions expenditure, such as on a fleet of ships or large concentration of tanks and soldiers. The last orbital weapons platform we know of are the Archimedes 1 and 2, which are also in geosynchronous orbit but over the Mojave this time. These are Poseidon energy weapon projects that were done in conjunction with the US military for use in the Sino-American War. They are laser-based weapons that were more precise surgical light artillery than the Judgment Day atomic salvos of the two previous stations, that shoot a high-powered laser at targets highlighted by the Euclid C finder in mere seconds after the trigger is pulled, which may not sound as useful as a high-explosive 155mm artillery shell, but I could see this being used in the anti-armor and bunker busting roles more than anti-personnel. This is because of the system's relatively limited area of effect, which only scorches a few square meters around where the laser converges, but this feature makes it perfect for burning through the thin roof armor on tanks and the reinforced concrete of pillboxes in a single devastating blow from above, all direct from a small handheld targeted device that is much easier to carry and used than a missile launcher or other anti-tank weapons. Archimedes 1 was designed to protect the Helios 1 power station, while the Archimedes 2 was able to target offsite locations within a limited radius. Both are powered by Helios 1, which is where this research and development was done, and utilized microwave radiation transmissions from the power station to deliver energy to them in orbit. And this is one of the greatest shortfalls in my mind, which tethered the satellites to a specific area and made them vulnerable to sabotage by destroying or interrupting their power supply. But this may have been done to help develop the concept for research purposes, and full-scale military models were to include onboard reactors to make them fully independent from ground-based energy sources, although the targeting tower would still be vulnerable on the ground, as the current iteration uses a stationary tower set in place so the Seafinder's mark can be triangulated by measuring the known distance between the control tower and that of the mark to get precise coordinates so the beam can be perfectly focused for maximum effect. Then there's a space shuttle in San Francisco on the Golden Gate Bridge. It is unknown how it got here, but my best guess being the Hubologist brought it to the bridge, as this is the only runway-like surface they could find that was long enough for them to use in the city, although it may have also been in transport through San Francisco at the time of the Great War and was left in the area after being abandoned. We will never know. But this ship gives us a great idea as to how America was able to construct so many space stations in orbit during the war, as this is a gargantuan, nuclear-powered, reusable spacecraft that could ferry dozens of astronauts and a ton of material into space at a time. It is a broad delta-wing design that gives its maximum lift while in atmosphere, which is powered by a cartoonishly large main nuclear engine to carry the payload into space, and two smaller clusters of 4 engines each on either side of the wing for exo-atmospheric use. Many different companies assisted with America's space program. We already touched on Arcjet systems and how they participated in the Mars Shot project. The company was headquartered in the Boston area, just west of Great Gardens, and had a focus on aerospace engineering for both the public and private sectors. Presumably their most well-known project was the Stingray Deluxe fighter jet, a model of which is proudly displayed on their doorstep. The company's CEO was paranoid to the point where he insisted on double trouble in security after the contract was landed, which forced employees and guests to both wear special identification badges or risk being shot by the automated security. But even after this expansion in security, a reporter was incinerated during a public test firing of the XMB booster engine after he stuck into the engine core room, and his death would be covered up by the CEO to retain the company's positive image. Bowen, one of the employees, discovered the incident and wanted to take it to the police. The CEO threatened to kill him and his family unless they kept silent. The other major aerospace company known in Fallout is Repconn, or the Rocket Engineering and Production Company of Nevada with an extra N. This company was well on its way to a revolutionary breakthrough in rocketry pre-war, with heavy investment in fission and plasma-based propulsion systems to create economical rocket engines during the resource crisis, and were actively testing the concept at the launch facility up until the Great War. This was despite several tragic accidents and a hostile takeover in 2076 by Robert House, but Repconn never lost their ambitions like extraterrestrial mining operations powered by the engines to save Earth from the resource wars, which are noble goals if only they could get their engines to work properly. However, the company's main focus was shifted to the newly established weapons research wing that utilized their previous work into plasma propulsion to develop improved plasma weaponry for the US military at House's request. So that's the extent to which America had reached space, but there are other related topics in game. Robert House had lofty ambitions to put people into orbit again within 50 years and began colonizing distant planets within 100, while the infamous Zenton aliens had been watching Earth since at least the 1500s and taking Earthlings and artifacts for study. A few notable examples being the abduction of astronaut Colonel Hardigan during his space flights and the many Zenton encounters the residents of Fallout would experience, but these are topics for another day as the lore is too extensive for me to cover right now. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends, and I will see you in the next one.